every Thursday we head to the US to find out what's happening in Washington. Alstair Dawber is the Washington correspondent of the Times and the Sunday Times. Alstair, I know I say this every week, but quiet week?
Not especially, no.
Not especially, no.
Today marks Donald Trump's first full month back in office, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster, that's for sure.
Only been a month, my word.
Only been a month.
You're attending the annual Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, which gets underway today. Explain to us what CPAC is.
Well, CPAC was a conservative organisation started in the 70s in the wake of the Watergate scandal to bring conservatives together. And over the decade, it's become a sort of unofficial Republican Party conference. In the last few years, it's become a real cheerleading exercise for the MAGA movement, Donald Trump's brand of republicanism. And now, if you mention, I don't know, the names Bush or Cheney or Romney, that's likely to be with as many boos as Obama, Biden and Clinton. It's become a real Trump supporting festival of quite right-wing politics, but now politics that's pretty much in the Republican mainstream.
Wow. Yeah, well, look, earlier in the show, I spoke to Matthew Bartlett. He's a Republican strategist and a former Trump administration nominee, and I asked him whether he expected there to be any backlash to Trump's spat with Zelensky.
Right now, it is the right is riding high. Not only have they, returned to power, but they feel vindicated on every issue, from foreign policy to domestic to the border, that they talked about for 4 years. It seems as if the American people, certainly election, sided with them. So right now, CPAC and MAGA is going to have a massive party. But remember, parties don't always last forever.
Alstair, explain this to us, because over here it feels a lot like Europe is in not just in crisis, but in kind of existential crisis, and because of what seems like the erratic and dangerous behavior of the US president. And I mean, do the Republicans not care? Are they glad? Do they see this all as a victory? I mean, do they know how upset Europe is, or do they think that's a good thing?
Sort of Republican you're talking to, the Republicans that will be at CPAC over the next few days will be absolutely delighted with, I think on the whole, delighted with the way that Donald Trump has approached Ukraine. For years, I've been going to this conference now for the last 3 or 4 years, and every time we've had, why is so much money being pumped into a country that very few of us can point to on a map, and it's costing us billions of dollars? There are Republicans, especially on the Hill, in the House and the Senate, who are very wary of this approach. I mean, many of them grew up idolizing Ronald Reagan when he was president. And Reagan, I don't think, would have approached this issue in quite the same way. So in some parts of the Republican Party, there is nervousness, but they also realize that Donald Trump is the absolutely unchallenged leader of Republican politics at the moment. And to go against him is really risking everything.
Yeah, indeed. Well, so who else is going to be there then beyond the obvious?
Well, JD Vance is the keynote speaker today. He starts in about 3 hours' time. And then it's a real flavour, a bit of an international flavour today, including Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister. She'll be making a speech. And then a bit later on, Nigel Farage as well. Over the last few years, he's become a bit of a darling of CPAC, and certainly will be treated very well when he gets up on the stage, I think.
And President Milei of Argentina is there as well.
Yeah, he speaks in the next couple of days. And I was there last night picking up my press accreditation. And as ever, Donald Trump isn't listed on the agenda. But Donald Trump got back to Washington last night, having been in Florida. And I think that he's expected possibly to speak on Saturday, which I think all these people that turn up from all over the country will be pretty bit disappointed if they don't get to see Donald Trump this time.
Is Liz Truss likely to get a big audience? Does she have a big sort of a secret second life in the United States? Is it like finding out where your cat goes at night? I mean, is she very glamorous over there? What's going on?
Well, she comes out here quite a lot. She was at the inauguration, Donald Trump's inauguration a month ago, staying at a hotel just next door to our office. She's a regular speaker at this event. I was sitting next to a guy in the press area last year who was wearing a MAGA hat, and he was jumping up and down and saying how wonderful it was and how great it was. And he turned to me after Liz Truss had finished and said, "Hey, you're a Brit. Who's that woman? She's great." So wow. She's very popular, but whether she's got quite the recognition in the States that she might like is a different issue. Well,
let's hope she plays the hits. Let's talk about Doge, Trump and Elon Musk's slashing of the federal workforce, because there's some potentially quite important scientists who have just found themselves caught in the crossfire, right?
Well, that's right. I mean, Elon Musk and Donald Trump are going to every government department and cutting, it seems, thousands and thousands of jobs. We are in the midst, however, of a bird flu outbreak here in the States, which is worrying a lot of people. The Department of Agriculture on the weekend, many of its people got their marching orders, only for the department to turn around a couple of days ago and say, "Well, hang on a sec, we've just fired all the scientists that are working on this bird flu outbreak." And so there were letters that went out to a lot of these people that had been given their marching orders to please come back to work, and orders forgiven, at least for now.
And I mean, how serious is the bird flu outbreak?
Well, some scientists suggest it could reach an epidemic. I don't think there's any particular threat to human health at the moment, but just in terms of the economy, the price of eggs, for example, which is something Donald Trump talks about a lot, has doubled over the last sort of year or so. People say it's very difficult to find eggs on supermarket shelves, and many millions of birds have already been culled. So it's a serious problem, but it's not been helped by the fact that several people working on a solution to it have found themselves out of a job as of last weekend.
Has this been a bit of a pattern with sackings being a bit overzealous? I'm sure I remember reading something about something similar happening in the nuclear industry, for example.
Yeah, each department, because Trump and Elon Musk are so powerful at the moment, they get the visitation from the Doge people. It's like sort of the Black Death turning up, and I think there's been a tendency in some departments to panic a little bit, and anyone on any sort of probation or temporary contract seems to have been fired. But you're right, there are some nuclear scientists that have got their marching orders. There are large swathes of the workforce doing, what were very important jobs up until maybe last week, who now see themselves unemployed. And I think that's going to be a pattern we see. The new Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, he was in Europe last week. He's come back and got his feet under the desk at the Pentagon this week, and has ordered about $8 billion worth of savings at the Pentagon. So again, we can probably see some quite high-ranking military officers being told that their careers are over.
Alstair Dawber, thank you very much indeed. Alstair is, of course, the Washington correspondent of the Times and the Sunday Times. Always good to speak to you. Vladimir Zelensky will meet with Donald Trump's special envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, today, following a public row with the US president yesterday. Trump called Zelensky a dictator after the Ukrainian president accused him of living in a disinformation space. All this creates a difficult situation for Sir Keir Starmer, who is hoping to serve as a diplomatic bridge between the US and Europe during negotiations over an end to the war. Well, I'm joined now by Leslie Vinjamuri, who is the director of the US and Americas program at Chatham House. Leslie, hello.
Hello. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Just afternoon. You're 2.5 minutes right. Thanks very much. Is it possible for Keir Starmer to act as a bridge between the US and Europe when their positions are so very far apart?
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by bridge. Clearly, somebody needs to be talking to President Trump, somebody from Europe, that is. And at the moment, I think it may well be easiest for Keir Starmer. The question, I think, is more, what can he expect to achieve or to even deliver with those communications? And, at some level, it's very much, I think, about just keeping an open line, trying to, in a very difficult context, introduce some degree of measure and indicate, to the extent that he can, that there is a coherence coming from Europe on its intentions, its position. I think that's easier, but also what Europe is able and planning to deliver when it comes to those basic questions of defense. But now we're in that sort of very sharp conversation about what Europe would do to secure and to maintain a border if there is a deal done. Concrete questions about possibly troops on the ground. I mean, this is snowballing almost out of control, hour by hour, to a point that I think Keir Starmer's visit is going to be one of just trying to maintain some sort of conversation at a time when Europeans are going to be obviously outraged, furious, and incensed by President Trump's allegations against Zelensky, his reversal of the last 4 years of U.S. and European policy. So it's a tremendously difficult time. I think talking is clearly very important, and Keir Starmer is the person who's going to have to lead that at this moment.
I mean, one has a bit of a fear that the more upset European leaders are, the sort of the happier Donald Trump is about it. And the moment that European leaders all sort of banded together and went, okay, we've got a plan, we don't need America anymore, that's sort of the last thing you'd want, right?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult to see how Europe is going to be able to say we don't need America anymore anytime soon. But to the extent that Europe can demonstrate, again, that it is working collectively, that there is a very clear commitment to spending more in a way that's meaningful and moves quickly, that it has an idea for how it can contribute to securing not only Ukraine, but the eastern perimeters of NATO. Now there's a conversation. I don't know how far this has gone or how serious this is, but we've seen just yesterday a suggestion that Donald Trump is considering removing all U.S. troops from those states that joined NATO after 1990. I mean, this is extraordinary, the things that are being said. It's very difficult to know, what the gap will be between some of the things that are being said and what will actually turn into real policy. And this is obviously the challenge for Europe, is to deal with the very fast moving change in rhetoric and not to know whether it actually will lead to a change in policy.
Yeah.
So there's partly a bargaining game, but the stakes couldn't be higher. The turn couldn't seem to be more dramatic. And the just utter lack of, quite frankly, respect from the U.S. president for America's closest partners in Europe, allies, is shocking. But Europe is going to have to move beyond that shock and just simply deal with this. And I think this is where the British have a very useful role to play. That pragmatism, that ability to just work in a measured way to try and bridge a gap. And it's a good time, I think, for the UK to take that role as it's trying to reset its relationship with Europe, having a historically good relationship with the US, and even handling Donald Trump, quite well in comparative terms.